On April 29, 1945, at 7 a.m., a 26-year-old medic crouched at the base of a steep cliff on Okinawa and looked up into a hell of fire and steel. His name was Desmond Doss. Above him rose the Maya escarpment, known to American soldiers as Hacksaw Ridge, a 350-foot wall of sharp limestone, riddled with Japanese tunnels, machine gun nests, and mortar positions. Every yard was mined. Every rocky outcrop could mean death. The Japanese army had spent years fortifying this position. Underground passages connected bunkers to one another. Machine guns were positioned to cover every possible advance. American soldiers had to climb cargo nets up the near vertical cliff, without cover, without protection. It was a climb straight into the kill zone. But Desmond Doss carried no rifle, no bayonet, no pistol. He was a medic and a devoted Seventh-day Adventist. His faith forbade him from taking a life. He had chosen to go to war to save lives, not to end them. Many of his fellow soldiers thought he was crazy. At Fort Jackson, South Carolina, they had mocked him. They threw boots at him while he prayed. They called him a coward. Some officers even tried to have him discharged from the army, claiming he was mentally unfit for service. But Doss stayed, not out of stubbornness, but out of conviction. He had already treated wounded men under fire on Guam and in the Philippines. He had earned 2 Bronze Stars. The same men who once mocked him had watched him run into open fields under enemy fire to pull wounded soldiers back to safety. Now he faced his greatest test. Hacksaw Ridge was no ordinary battlefield. It was a strategic stronghold. Whoever controlled the escarpment controlled the advance toward Shuri, the heart of the Japanese defensive line. On Okinawa, on May 2nd, the assault began. The first soldiers climbed the nets. The way of their M1 rifles thudded against their backs. Grenades clinked at their belts. Doss climbed with a medic's pack, bandages, sulfa powder, morphine, plasma bottles, and a rope. During training, he had accidentally learned a special knot, a double bowline loop. Instead of 1 loop, it created 2. One could be placed under a wounded man's arms, the other beneath his legs. The knot would not tighten. It would not cut into flesh. And a single man could lower a wounded soldier down the cliff in a controlled descent. What had once been a mistake would now become his most powerful weapon. As the first soldiers reached the top, the inferno began. Japanese machine guns opened fire. Mortar shells exploded. Artillery tore through the newly formed lines. Men who had survived the climb fell within seconds. The plateau above was covered in craters, shrapnel, and smoke. And wounded men. Doss moved among them. Bullets struck the ground beside him. He pressed bandages into open wounds, injected morphine, dragged men behind rocks. The Japanese often targeted medics first. Many were killed within minutes. Doss removed the red cross from his uniform. He did not want to be a visible target. Hours passed. The situation worsened. Japanese soldiers suddenly emerged from underground tunnels behind American lines. The defense began to collapse. By evening, the order to retreat was given. Those still able to fight were to climb back down the cliff. But dozens of wounded men remained above. To be left behind meant torture or execution. Doss watched as his unit withdrew. He stayed, alone, without a weapon, with a rope. Night fell over Hacksaw Ridge, and Desmond Doss began to write history. The sun had long disappeared beyond the horizon when the last combat-ready soldiers climbed back down the cargo nets. The sound of machine guns slowly faded in the distance. What remained were the groans of the wounded, and Desmond Doss. Hacksaw Ridge lay in half-darkness. Smoke hung heavy over the shattered plateau. The smell of burned gunpowder, blood, and wet earth mixed with the salty air of the Pacific. Between craters and splintered tree trunks lay men who could no longer walk. Some were unconscious. Others called out for their mothers. A few could only whisper. Doss knew if he left now, they would die. The Japanese lines were only yards away. Underground tunnels connected their positions. They were waiting. They were watching. And they knew the Americans had withdrawn. A single medic was easy prey. But Doss knelt beside the first wounded soldier. A young man, maybe 19. Shrapnel had torn through his thigh. Blood had already soaked through the makeshift bandage. "I'm going to get you down from here," Doss whispered. He pulled out the rope. The double bowline knot. 2 loops, one under the arms, one under the legs. With steady movements, despite the distant explosions, he secured the knot. Then he dragged the soldier to the edge of the cliff, 350 feet, barely visible in the darkness. He slowly lowered the body over the edge, inch by inch, controlling every movement with his bare hands. The rope burned against the skin. Below, soldiers from his unit waited. They had not expected anyone to come back. When the first wounded man reached the bottom, disbelief spread among them. Above, Doss heard only the faint echo of the wind. He turned around. Dozens were still lying there. He knelt beside the next one. "Lord, help me get one more," he murmured. And again, hours passed. Japanese patrols moved between the craters. Sometimes Doss heard voices, only a few yards away. Once, he lay motionless beside an unconscious soldier while footsteps passed near him. He held his breath. No rifle in his hands. Only faith. In the distance, flares lit up the sky. For seconds, the plateau was as bright as day. Bodies, barbed wire, smoke, everything visible. Then darkness again. With every descent, he had to make sure the wounded man did not slam against the cliff face. One wrong angle, and the body would swing. One wrong grip, and both would fall. His hands began to bleed, but he did not count in numbers. He counted in prayers. "Help me get one more." A soldier with a broken arm. A radio operator with a stomach wound. A sergeant with burned hands. Each one became a mission. At one point, Doss stumbled over a body he believed was already dead. When he touched him, the man's eyes opened weakly. "Leave me," the soldier whispered. Doss shook his head. "Not today." He quickly bandaged the wounds, lifted him onto his shoulders, and carried him through mud and shrapnel to the edge. The night felt endless. Below the cliff, the men began to understand what was happening. Each time another body emerged from the darkness, the number rose. 10, 20, 30. No one knew exactly how many. But above, Doss kept working. His uniform was soaked with sweat and blood. His breathing came in heavy bursts. His muscles burned. Just before dawn, he suddenly heard a sound directly behind him, a metallic click. He slowly turned. A Japanese soldier stood only a few yards away. The rifle was aimed at him. Seconds passed, but the rifle failed. A jam. The Japanese soldier hesitated. Just for a moment. Then he disappeared back between the rocks. Doss remained standing. He could have died in that moment, but he knelt once more beside another wounded man. "Help me get one more." As the first gray streaks of morning colored the horizon, Hacksaw Ridge was nearly silent. The Japanese defenders were preparing for another assault, and Desmond Doss had not slept all night. He looked across the plateau. Hardly any movement, hardly any voices. Slowly, he walked to the edge one last time. He lowered another soldier. Below, they counted. 50, 60, more. When Doss finally climbed down the rope himself, his hands were shaking so badly that 2 men had to support him. No one spoke. The men who once mocked him now looked at him, as if he were something beyond understanding. A medic, without a weapon, who had remained alone on the cliff. Later, it was estimated that he had saved around 75 men that night. But for Doss, it was never a number. It was every single face, every single voice, every single breath that continued. The Battle of Okinawa was far from over. Hacksaw Ridge would be fought over again, and Desmond Doss would climb back up, not with a weapon, but with a rope. Morning did not bring peace. It brought artillery. As the gray light of dawn spread across Okinawa, American commanders prepared for another assault on Hacksaw Ridge. The men who had survived the previous day looked different now. Quieter, slower. Many of them had seen something impossible during the night. They had seen a single medic lower man after man down a 350-foot cliff. And now, that same medic was climbing back up. Desmond Doss tightened the straps of his medical pack. His hands were wrapped in rough bandages. The skin beneath was torn and blistered from the rope. He said nothing. The artillery barrage began before the first soldiers touched the nets. American guns thundered from below, trying to soften the Japanese defenses. The ridge shook with explosions. Dirt and limestone rained down from the top. Then came the order. Climb. Once again, men began ascending the cargo nets, rifles on their backs, fear in their eyes. Doss climbed among them. The plateau looked worse than before. Bodies still lay where they had fallen. The ground was churned mud and shattered rock. For a moment, it seemed quiet. Then the Japanese counterattack began. From hidden tunnel openings, soldiers emerged screaming. Machine guns opened from multiple angles. Mortars landed with terrifying precision. The Americans were caught in overlapping fields of fire. Men dropped instantly. Doss moved without hesitation. He reached a private whose shoulder had been shattered by a bullet. He packed a wound with gauze, injected morphine, dragged him behind crater. Another explosion. A blast wave knocked Doss off his feet. His ears rang violently. For a few seconds, he could hear nothing but a high-pitched tone. He forced himself upright. More wounded. He crawled to a corporal bleeding from the neck. Pressed bandages. Applied pressure. Whispered calm words as bullets struck the dirt around them. Then came the grenade. It landed only a few yards away. Someone shouted, but there was no time. The explosion tore through the air. Shrapnel ripped into Doss's left leg. He felt the impact before he understood it. A burning shock that knocked the breath from his lungs. He collapsed beside the man he had been treating. For a moment, he lay still. He looked down. Blood soaked through his trouser leg. The pain came seconds later. Sharp, pulsing, relentless. Another medic crawled toward him. "You're hit." Doss nodded. The wound was deep. Metal fragments embedded in muscle. They began treating him immediately. A stretcher was called, for soldiers lifted him. As they carried him toward the cliff edge, the battle raged on around them. Smoke drifted across the plateau. Japanese soldiers were still firing from concealed positions. Halfway to the nets, Doss saw something. Another soldier lay bleeding nearby. The stretcher stopped. "Put me down," Doss said. The men hesitated. "That's an order." They lowered him. Despite the pain in his leg, Doss crawled to the wounded man. He examined the injuries quickly. Chest wound, heavy bleeding. He worked with shaking hands. Bandage, pressure, morphine. Only when the man was stabilized did Doss allow himself to be lifted again. They resumed carrying him. Then rifle fire cracked from the ridge. One of the stretcher bearers jerked violently and fell. A sniper. The stretcher dropped. Doss hit the ground again. Chaos erupted. The remaining soldiers scrambled for cover. Doss understood something in that instant. If he remained on the stretcher, more men would risk their lives trying to carry him. He could not allow that. "Give me a rifle," he said. The nearest soldier looked stunned. "You don't carry a rifle." "Give it to me." The soldier handed him an M1. Doss did not raise it to shoot. He used it as a crutch. Leaning on the rifle for support, he began dragging himself across the battlefield, one painful movement at a time, toward cover. Each step felt like fire. Each breath felt heavier. But he refused evacuation. He reached partial cover behind shattered rock. There, he continued treating wounded men, even as blood ran down his own leg. The battle intensified. Japanese soldiers launched another close-range assault. Hand-to-hand fighting broke out near the tunnel entrances. American forces struggled to hold their position. And in the middle of it, wounded, bleeding, barely able to stand, Desmond Doss continued doing what it had always done, saving lives. The rifle trembled in his hands, not because he was afraid, because he was losing blood. Desmond Doss leaned against the shattered limestone ridge, using the M1 rifle not as a weapon but as a crutch. Around him, Hacksaw Ridge had turned into a furnace of smoke and metal. The counterattack had not slowed. If anything, it had intensified. Japanese mortar rounds began landing closer. One shell exploded only yards away. The concussion slammed Doss against a rock. His wounded leg buckled beneath him. For a moment, blackness edged into his vision. He forced himself awake. Men were screaming again. A private lay just beyond a shallow crater. clutching what remained of his hand. Another soldier crawled blindly, blood streaming from his scalp. Doss dragged himself forward. Each movement tore at the metal embedded in his leg. His trousers were soaked dark red now. The makeshift bandage had loosened. He didn't look at it. He focused on the living. He reached the private first. The hand was gone, shredded by shrapnel. Bone fragments glinted white beneath torn flesh. "Look at me," Doss said calmly. The boy's eyes were wide, unfocused. "You're going to make it." Doss tightened a tourniquet, using a strip of cloth and the barrel of a broken rifle. He worked quickly, efficiently, despite the tremor in his own body. Gunfire ripped overhead. The Japanese had begun another push. They emerged from camouflaged tunnel mouths, charging with bayonets fixed. American machine gunners tried to cut them down, but visibility was poor. Smoke swallowed everything. The fighting collapsed into chaos. Doss moved to the next wounded man. A chest wound. Entry high, no exit visible. He sealed it as best he could. Pressed down. Whispered reassurance. Another explosion. This one closer. Shrapnel struck him again. This time, fragments tore into his arm. The impact spun him sideways. He fell face first into the dirt. For several seconds he did not move. The battlefield roared around him. Then slowly, painfully, he rolled onto his back. His left arm was bleeding now. Not as badly as his leg, but enough. 2 wounds. Still breathing. Still conscious. Still needed. A soldier crawled toward him. "You're hit again." Doss nodded. "We've got to get you down." "No," Doss answered quietly. The soldier stared at him in disbelief. "You can't even stand." Doss looked past him, toward another figure lying motionless near the edge of the plateau. "That man can't stand either." The soldier hesitated. Another mortar round landed behind them. There was no more time for argument. Together, they dragged the unconscious man toward partial cover. Doss directed the bandaging, even as his own strength drained. The attack lasted hours. Wave after wave. Sometimes silent infiltration from the tunnels. Sometimes screaming charges. American lines bent, almost broke. But they did not collapse, because men who had been saved the night before were now back on their feet, fighting for the medic who had refused to leave them. At one point, the firing slackened. A strange pause. Smoke drifted slowly across the ridge. Doss lay against a crater wall, barely upright now, his rifle still planted in the earth to support him. His vision blurred intermittently. He knew the signs. Shock was coming. He pressed his hand against his leg wound, feeling warmth seep through his fingers. Not much time left before he lost too much blood. Footsteps approached. American. A captain crouched beside him. "That's it, Doss. You're going down." This time, Doss did not argue immediately. He looked across the ridge, counted in his head. One more wounded soldier still visible. Near the cliff's edge, alone, he turned back to the captain. After him. The captain followed his gaze, swore under his breath. "You'll die trying." Doss almost smiled. "So will he?" The captain signaled 2 men. They crawled out under sporadic fire. Doss tried to move with them. His leg collapsed. He hit the ground hard. Pain exploded through his body. The captain held him down. "That's an order, medic. Stay." For the first time, Doss obeyed. He watched as the final wounded soldier was dragged to safety. Only then did he allow himself to lie back fully. The stretcher arrived minutes later. 4 men lifted him carefully. He did not resist this time. But halfway to the nets, sniper fire cracked again. The men dropped low. One was hit in the shoulder. The stretcher tipped. Doss slid off into the dirt. He lay there staring up at the gray Okinawan sky. And in that moment, he understood something clearly. If they carried him, more men might fall. He rolled onto his side. "Leave me," they protested. He insisted, "Get the others down first." The men hesitated, then obeyed. They moved away, retrieving more wounded. Doss remained alone. The battlefield had shifted slightly. Fighting now concentrated near the far ridge. He was temporarily in relative cover. He pulled himself slowly toward a shallow depression in the earth, each movement slower than the last. He tore open a field dressing with his teeth and tried to reinforce the bandage around his leg. His hands were slick with blood. The rifle lay beside him, still in use as a weapon. He closed his eyes briefly, not to sleep, to pray. No dramatic words, no long speech, just a whisper. Lord, if I'm meant to go, let it be after I've done enough. Footsteps again. American medics this time. They reached him carefully. You're not walking out of here. Doss exhaled. I know. They placed him on the stretcher again. This time the descent began. Slowly, carefully, down the nets. Every jolt sent shock waves through his body. Halfway down, artillery thundered again above them. Japanese forces launching yet another counterattack. Men climbing up even as he descended. As Doss reached the bottom of Hacksaw Ridge, soldiers gathered around. Some removed their helmets. Others simply stared. They had heard what he had done. Not once, not twice, but again and again. And now he was coming down not as a hero, but as one more wounded man. As stretcher bearers carried him toward the aid station, a young private jogged alongside. Sir, how many did you save? Doss turned his head slightly. His voice was barely audible. I don't know. And that was the truth, because to him, it had never been a number. Only faces, only voices, only breaths that continued. The medics began operating immediately. Shrapnel removed from his leg, fragments from his arm, morphine administered, bandages wrapped tight. The battle above continued for days. Hacksaw Ridge changed hands more than once. But the story of what happened there, the night before and the day after, spread through the ranks like quiet fire. The man who refused a rifle, the man who refused evacuation, the man who stayed when others withdrew, the man who would not be carried until others were safe. Weeks later, when the campaign for Okinawa finally ended, the casualty lists were staggering. Thousands dead, thousands more wounded. But among the survivors were dozens of men who could point to one name, Desmond Doss. Months later, in Washington, D.C., on the White House lawn, President Harry South Truman would place the Medal of Honor around his neck. But none of that existed yet. Right now, he lay in a hospital bed, alive, barely, and far away, across the Pacific, the war still raged, because Hacksaw Ridge had been only one battle, and the world was not finished burning. And far away, across the Pacific, the war still raged. But for Desmond Doss, the battlefield had grown quiet. The white ceiling above his hospital bed did not shake from artillery. There were no mortars here, no machine gun fire, no screams echoing across limestone cliffs, only the steady rhythm of medical instruments. And pain. His leg was wrapped thick in bandages. Metal fragments had been removed, but not all damage could be undone. His arm was stitched, his side heavily dressed. He had survived Hacksaw Ridge, barely. Nurses moved carefully around him. Doctors checked his wounds daily. Infection was a constant threat. In 1945, antibiotics were limited. Recovery was uncertain. But physical wounds were only part of the story. At night, when the ward grew dim and the other patients slept, Doss lay awake. He did not dream of medals. He dreamed of voices, the cries from Ridge, the weight of bodies against rope, the sound of grenades striking dirt. Sometimes he would close his eyes and see flares lighting the plateau again, bright white flashes revealing shattered trees and broken men. War does not end when the shooting stops. It follows you home. Weeks passed. Letters began arriving, some from men he had saved, handwritten, uneven, emotional. You carried me. I wouldn't be alive without you. I don't know how to thank you. Doss read them quietly, folded them neatly, placed them beside his bed. He never answered with pride, only gratitude. He often wrote the same line back. I was just doing my duty. Outside the hospital, the war reached its final chapters. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa had demonstrated how fiercely Japan would resist invasion. Casualties were catastrophic on both sides. American leadership faced a terrifying decision. In August 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Days later, Japan surrendered. World War II ended. The planet exhaled. In hospital wards across the Pacific, wounded men wept, some for relief, some for grief. Doss did neither. He bowed his head and prayed. Months later, he was transported back to the United States. His body had healed enough for travel, though pain remained constant. Walking without assistance was difficult. The shrapnel damage would trouble him for the rest of his life. But something else awaited him. October 12, 1945, the White House lawn. A ceremony unlike any other. Rows of soldiers stood at attention. Reporters gathered. Cameras flashed. President Harry S. Truman stepped forward, holding the nation's highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor. Desmond Doss stood in uniform, humble, quiet, slightly uncomfortable in the spotlight. When Truman placed a medal around his neck, he reportedly said, "I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States." The crowd applauded. Doss did not smile widely. He did not raise his hands. He did not look triumphant, because in his mind, he was not the hero of Hacksaw Ridge, the men who had climbed back up after being lowered. They were heroes. The ones who never came down, they were heroes. He was simply the medic who stayed. After the ceremony, reporters asked him the same question over and over. How many did you save? He never gave an exact number. About 50, maybe 75. He never counted carefully, because each man had not been a number. Each had been a prayer. Returning to civilian life proved harder than climbing that ridge. Pain followed him daily. His left arm never fully regained strength. His leg carried permanent damage. Infections later cost him a lung and several ribs. The physical toll of Okinawa was lifelong, but the emotional toll was quieter. Crowds made him uncomfortable. Loud noises startled him. Fireworks on the 4th of July felt too much like artillery. Yet he never spoke bitterly about war. He never condemned the men who carried rifles. He never elevated himself above them. He simply maintained what he had always believed. He could serve without killing. In the years that followed, he worked modest jobs, lived a simple life, attended church faithfully, raised a family. Occasionally, survivors of Hacksaw Ridge would visit him. Some walked with canes. Some carried scars across their faces. All carried memory. They would sit together and speak about that night, the ropes, the darkness, the prayer repeated over and over. Help me get one more. Many admitted something quietly. When they learned Doss was coming back up the ridge with them, they felt safer, not because he carried a weapon, because he carried courage. True courage, the kind that does not depend on force. Years turned into decades. The world changed. New wars came and went. New soldiers climbed different hills in different countries. But the story of Hacksaw Ridge remained, not as a tale of conquest, not as a tale of destruction, but as a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, compassion can survive. In 2006, Desmond Doss passed away at the age of 87. He was buried with full military honors. The rifle salutes echoed across the cemetery, a sound he had never fired himself in combat. And yet no one doubted his place among warriors. Because bravery is not defined by the weapon you hold. It is defined by what you are willing to risk for others. On that limestone cliff in Okinawa, surrounded by smoke and death, one unarmed medic changed the definition of courage. He did not conquer the ridge. He endured it. He did not take lives. He preserved them. And when the night grew darkest, he whispered into chaos, "Help me get one more." And he did, again and again and again.